Researchers focusing on earth science at a one-of-a-kind facility.
It's a greenhouse in the middle of Arizona, and with that it's right underneath the glass. The higher canopy sees temperatures that are much higher than any tropical forest sees in the world.
Trying to predict the effects of climate change in a large-scale laboratory.
The question that we are really after right now is, what are coral reefs going to look like as temperature continues to rise?
And capturing images that bring the human element to science journalism. This is Metro Week. Hi, I'm Tony Perkins, in for Vanessa Barchfield, and welcome to Metro Week. This time, a look at Biosphere 2, one of the top research facilities for earth science right here in southern Arizona. We'll talk to 4 biosphere researchers about their work and how it could make a difference in our day-to-day lives. And we'll see how the region's desert conditions create spectacular images appearing in publications around the world. That and much more after a look at the week's top stories from the Arizona Public Media Newsroom.
The Arizona Supreme Court today upheld a levy on hospitals used to fund the state's Medicaid expansion. The assessment was passed by the legislature in 2013, but was challenged by Republicans who said it was unconstitutional. They said the assessment was a tax and needed to pass by a 2/3 vote, not a simple majority. The High Court disagreed. The funding helps cover 400,000 low-income Arizona residents on Medicaid. A 50-cent a night fee on parking spots for recreational vehicles that help fund the Keno Sports Complex is no longer in place. The surcharge was used to pay off debt accrued to build the complex. Stadium District Director Rini Ochoa says the end of the fee shows growth in Keno's use. Despite that, she says the complex is not quite covering all its costs, especially upgrades of the 20-year-old facility. Pima County expects to pay off the debt from the stadium by the end of this year. And a national coalition of civil rights is giving Tucson police a mixed grade for the way they use body cameras. The Tucson Police Department scored mostly positive on the 8 criteria the Civil Rights Coalition used to evaluate the use of body cameras, but on what the group called the most critical element, the policy that allows police to review their footage before writing a report, TPD got a failing grade. Police officials said the group doing the assessment is not qualified to judge the use of the cameras. For more on these stories, visit our website.
Biosphere 2's location, 30 miles north of Tucson, means it's free from extreme weather effects and perfect for controllable, scalable research projects. One such project is happening at the Landscape Evolution Observatory, where Peter Troch is leading fellow researchers in science that goes from the ground up. Peter Troch has spent 10 years working with landscape evolution at Biosphere 2. He investigates Earth systems, and the Landscape Evolution Observatory, or LEO, is a classic example of a large-scale scientific research project that can only be done here.
I would say the 3 main questions that we try to address here in LEO are: how does life start on Earth or any other planet? It is a miracle that you have a recent lava flow on the island of Hawaii, and you come back 10 years later and there's an ecosystem flourishing on that lava flow. How does that happen? What are the processes that allow that to happen in such a short notice? So that's one question. The second question is, once that ecosystem has developed on that lava flow, how does that change the way water moves through the system, and how does it change the water availability? And then the third question is, what will happen to those ecosystems if the climate changes? Can we predict the trajectory of change from these ecosystems?
The team is 1 year into its current experiment. What it's found so far is that microbes flourish when water is added to biosphere soil. Those microbial communities are key to the way minerals are broken down into nutrients that feed plants.
So those initial processes of early life on an abiotic system is what we have been observing for the first year now.
The observations are done on 3 huge ramps, each angled at 10 degrees, covered with a basaltic soil mix dug from an Arizona mine.
So this is basaltic tephra.
It's the source of the Leo soil.
The angle allows enough downhill gravity for Troch's team to measure the effect of rainfall on soil erosion. The glass biosphere structure creates a greenhouse effect, simulating the impact of climate change on the slopes.
So basically we're sitting below 330 cubic meters of soil that rests on a steel platform. That soil contains over 1,800 sensors and samplers that we can use to observe what's going on inside in terms of the hydrology, the biogeochemistry. The whole system rests on 10 load cells, which allows us to measure the change of mass within the soil. So when we are raining on it, the rain gets stored within the soil, and that increases the total mass of the soil, so we can measure that change in storage. We can rain whenever we want to. We can change the temperature, we can change the humidity to some extent. We can add CO2 or other trace gases to the atmosphere. So that's a unique facility, unique in the world.
The researchers here begin with a basic question. How will ecosystems change over the next 100 years? Their work could uncover which ecosystems will adapt best to the impact of climate change, under the pressure of a variety of factors.
We are facing a crisis of feeding a growing population on Earth, while we are losing enormous amount of soils every year through erosion. So that imbalance of losing our arable soils where we can grow our crops and a growing population on Earth will bring us into a crisis within the next few decades. So we need to develop the technology through science on how we can avoid the erosion that we're currently experiencing, and B, turn degraded landscapes back into fertile soils where we can grow crops.
Earth system researchers have identified a critical zone of conditions that make life possible on Earth. They describe it as the range around the globe that goes from the deepest layer of bedrock and water interaction to the top of the plant canopy in the biosphere. Scientists say most life on Earth exists within that space.
And there are a lot of pressures on these ecosystems in the critical zone in general. So some of the pressures we will not be able to avoid. Temperature will keep rising. Knowing how to protect those ecosystems within the critical zone is going to be very important for us to provide the environment that we need in order to sustain our population on Earth.
Beneath the slopes, 1,800 sensors measure how rainfall, erosion, and soil composition affects the ability for plants to grow under biosphere conditions.
We have a number of instruments here that we use for real-time analysis of both water vapor and liquid water isotope composition. So this, for instance, this instrument is connected to the seepage phase, where we can pull water from the seepage phase and analyze it directly in real time with this laser spectrometer. We measure soil moisture, that's the amount of water that is present in the soil. We measure the pressure with which this water is held within the soil. We measure the carbon dioxide concentration within the soil. We measure the electrical conductivity of the soil. We also measure how much it rains, how much runs off. We measure the total change of mass of each hill slope. So yeah, that's just a handful of measurements that we do. And for each, we use specific sensors that some were developed specifically for this experiment, and some were just off the shelf. The sprinklers that you can see are used to add rainfall to the slopes. We can manipulate the system such that we can rain at different intensities, from a light drizzle to an intense storm.
And during some periods of time, no rainfall at all.
We are faced with the challenge of predicting what the fate will be of our landscapes under higher temperatures. Will the Sonoran Desert be looking like a Sonoran Desert in the next 50 years? That will depend on many factors that we are trying to study here in more detail.
What if there was a way to combine energy generation and food production at the same time? Biosphere researcher Greg Barron-Gafford is trying to solve that equation with agrivoltaics. Renewable energy production overhead, agricultural production below. Greg Barron-Gafford is looking at a new way to do agriculture in the future.
This is one of the funnest things for me as someone who has an ecological background. We found out that these large-scale solar arrays were creating kind of a heat island effect. They were creating a warmer microenvironment around them. And we thought, well, how can we solve that? These solar panels don't do as well when they get hot. So if we can cool them down, they'll be more efficient. And so we started to look out in nature and think about some of the mesquite trees that you see around town, or the palo verdes, these trees that usually have a community underneath them. And we thought, here's an example in nature of an overstory and an understory really working well together. And so we started to measure those out in the natural world, and we could see that the plants growing under the understory of the mesquite were really doing a lot better in terms of their temperature sensitivity. They weren't as stressed out. They could go through periods of drought because they didn't have as much sun baking on them. And we thought, what about our agriculture? We plant plants that are not adapted to the desert out in the open sun. That seems kind of cruel in a way. If you're a tomato plant, you had to give it lots of water. What if we could create a false overstory for them? Could they do better? And that's how we merged this one question about what kind of plants can you grow under solar panels that can help cool them down? And what kind of overstory can you create for agriculture that can make it more efficient?
Barron-Gafford's solar array at Biosphere 2 is 9 feet tall, built high enough for a farmer's tractor to pass underneath. But he needed some smaller examples to test his ideas before going large scale.
A lot of what we do at Biosphere 2 is about scaling. So we started off with a smaller scale project operating underneath individual solar panels. And we started with what we liked, salsa.
The researchers also grew cilantro, peppers, and tomatoes under the preliminary panels. They did it through one winter, spring and summer, and found that the solar panels trapped warmer air beneath them, and none of the plants suffered from frost during the winter time. Barron-Gafford's crew celebrated the success of growing vegetables in the solar panel shade. But they also wanted to know why they were succeeding. So they began to measure the factors which, according to Barron-Gafford, stress plants out.
Now we have sensors that we stick in the ground that actually measure how moist is the soil and how long does it stay at certain moistures. We measure the temperature. That's another thing that stresses us out, being too hot. So we measure the temperature of the air throughout the day and night cycles. We measure the humidity levels so that we can get a sense of how dry is the atmosphere. So inside the box here is the workhorse for our project. One of those other things that we want to measure is how wet is the soil? How much irrigation did we deliver, and how long does it keep the soil wet? And so throughout this soil profile, we have these sensors buried in the soil that are measuring the moisture level in the soil and the temperature of the soil. So again, after each one of those rain events or irrigation events, we can see how wet did the soil get and how long does it stay wet.
Barron-Gafford says the next challenge is moving the research from the lab setting into practical application. Plants grown in the shade require less water, and that's significant for growing crops in rural areas of Arizona, where some people travel hundreds of miles to find fruits and vegetables.
Now we're finding you could probably still grow some food in those areas, and some of those more rural areas are places where you can consider them a food desert. They don't have good access to nutritious food. One experiment we've been doing with the local elementary school is they planted carrots in August. That's months ahead of when you should be planting carrots in a typical setting, but they did really well. And so what if you can get 2 cycles of carrots in the same growing season because you've been able to extend that season? Now all of a sudden we're talking about more food that goes from the field to the table. We've been able to reduce the amount of water that we're using. That's really important, thinking about Arizona's future, which is going to be really water limited. Now we're able to use less water and grow the same or even more tomatoes. Again, that's food on the table.
When planners built Biosphere 2 in 1987, they created an ocean in the desert. 30 years later, it's being used for Katie Morgan's research on how coral reefs can survive in a warming climate.
My name is Katie Morgan. I am Program Coordinator for Marine Science Education and Outreach out at Biosphere 2. We right now are on our beach looking out at our ocean here at Biosphere 2. So this is our 700,000 gallon saltwater environment. So we're sitting on the beach that leads right up to it. We're always asking questions, and the question that we are really after right now is, what are coral reefs going to look like as temperature continues to rise? Because coral reefs are very susceptible to this increase in temperature. They don't survive well. And when we lose coral reefs, we lose a lot of the biodiversity in the ocean, we lose food production, we lose coastal protection. So coral reefs are incredibly important, and we need these coral reefs to stay intact. And so we know that temperatures are rising, and we know that the corals are not going to survive, most corals are not going to survive this increase in temperature. So the question is, can we put corals into Biosphere 2 ocean and raise the temperature in here and see how they react to that increase in temperature, and see what species might be more hardy than others and might be able to survive in the ocean in the future.
We're in the middle of the Sonoran Desert, sitting next to an ocean. But what do you try to do to make this environment special?
Something that's really unique about Biosphere 2 is that we can scale all these different things. We've got ways to change different variables in here. So we can change the wave motion and all those different things. And one of those variables being temperature, we've got a heat exchanger in the back, and that heat exchanger is, we can run hot water through different coils, and the salt water then passes through these heated coils and can increase or decrease the temperature depending on the temperature of water that we are running through those coils. And so we have the control to simulate future environments at 32 degrees Celsius. I mean, that's an extreme for a lot of these corals, is having that high of temperatures. But we can simulate that here. We can start at a natural temperature, and we can start to raise it over time and see those changes and really map those changes.
People like to go to the beach for a peaceful, relaxed atmosphere, but you want this to be a more dynamic environment.
This is not necessarily meant for us to lounge around and relax at, but it's meant for it to be a place that's constantly moving, constantly collecting data. We want to be for a place that visitors can come out here and they can see these different changes happening for themselves, and they can help us look at this data, and they can help us track changes. We want visitors to be able to be interactive with this. We want to have live streaming of our ocean so that people can, even if they're not at Biosphere 2, they can look at it. So we want this to be an interactive thing that the public is able to see, okay, coral reefs are important, and here's what Biosphere 2 is trying to do to save them. Science impacts us on a daily basis. Science is in everybody's lives, whether they like it or not. We're constantly, as humans, asking and answering our own questions. Having an understanding of science is important in order for us to make conscious decisions, in order for us to conserve the earth for our future generations, in order for us to live healthy lives. Science contributes a lot to our own personal health and our family's health. So I think it's something that might be taken for granted sometimes, that is so essential to our everyday lives, and we really need to continue to support the science that is going on around the world.
The nearest tropical rainforest to southern Arizona is thousands of miles away, but Biosphere 2 has successfully conducted research here at one of its best known and most fascinating environments.
My name is Joost van Haren, and I'm an assistant research professor at Biosphere 2, and I am part in charge of the rainforest. I do research here in the rainforest, and I'm also a biogeochemist who's interested in trace gases. So this is carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane. So right now we're in the rainforest here. So this is a very plant-rich, green environment that feels very humid and warm, and also smells very much of decomposition and biology being very active. And that's one of the key things about tropical forests that is so important for the global scale. Because of the relatively high amount of rainfall, as well as the relatively high temperatures, these are the most active forests or ecosystems on the planet. The kind of questions that you get at with that are, what is the response of tropical forest and tropical forest plants to increased temperatures? Is that going to change their use of water and the amount of water that is cycled through the ecosystem? Same with the carbon and other nutrients. Right here we have the instrumentation along this profile, and this sensor here, as I can demonstrate, it measures the wind speed. Right now, before it wasn't moving, I had to blow it. So there is right now little wind speed going on, and that probably does have to do with that at this point in time, this part of the air is cooled well, and only later on we'll have to add more air to it. Right here in this housing is a temperature humidity sensor. So we know what the temperature is, what the relative humidity is. Normally we try to keep it on the around 23 to 25 degrees centigrade, especially here in the lower areas. Those are standard temperatures for the Amazon basin. The relative humidity is normally between 70 and 90%. We know from what we've seen up to now in climate change that's already happened, for instance, in the Amazon basin, and what the predictions are that drought is going to be a much more prevalent aspect. And so what we can do here at Biosphere 2, we can do drought experiments. But the question is, again, how does the ecosystem respond once rainfall is cut out and water stress is becoming a very strong pressure on the way that the trees behave and the plants behave? And the great thing about Biosphere 2 is we can make a drought happen whenever we want to by just shutting off the water. And then that's where the control capability comes out. Honestly, we as humans are very much dependent on the earth. The water, right? How much rain actually falls on a day-to-day basis is depending on Earth's system, the hydrological system. The water that evaporates from the oceans is transported through the atmosphere to another location and delivers rain, right? So there's a very direct and simple reason. The other thing is that we depend on soils. Well, soils are generated by processes like weathering and erosion. That's generating the soils for us, and that makes it a good soil. We can grow plants like these in, but also outside. That helps the farmers to actually grow more crops and provide food for us. So even though most humans, and especially here in the United States and Western Europe, are right now removed from, or feel like they're removed from the Earth system, we're still very much dependent on them. Over the past 10-15 years, scientists have started to understand that what happens to an ecosystem, and especially if it's a very large ecosystem like the Amazon basin, the forests there, they're the same size as the continental United States. They're very large and they span a very large area. If something drastic is going to happen to that forest, that's going to impact the climate here in Arizona, potentially causing either more drought, changes in precipitations that farmers, it's going to impact farmers here in Arizona because it changes their growing season. Most research, and especially a lot of the research that I do as well, looking at climate change and how it affects ecosystems, happens far away from where people live. I do work in Peru and Brazil in the Amazon basin in very remote locations. Biosphere 2 gives a chance to put the research much closer to the public, because we have about 100,000 people come through here every year to visit. We can actually show them this is the kind of research that we're doing to understand what are the impacts on the ecosystems and how do the ecosystems respond.
Artists say southern Arizona's climate makes for great natural photography, and when the sky is clear and the air is pure, the images can be spectacular. John Dios is a photographer whose work has appeared in National Geographic and other publications. John, what makes for a good science journalism photograph?
Well, science journalism can be a lot of things, right? So you can have an electron microscope. You can get some really nice images blown up of microbes on a petri dish, or you can go out with something more charismatic, and you can get an elephant out in the wild, or lions, and so on and so forth. As far as photojournalism and journalism, you always want to get the human interest. So in Arizona, we always try to get, in the science journalism classes, we always try to get scientists working something in their environment or something that shows a scale of a research lab or a project that researchers or scientists at large are working on here in Tucson.
When we talk about photography at Biosphere 2, it's in a location that's obviously very attractive for photographers, but the lighting, sometimes has to be just right. And what kind of conditions have to be right to make a great photograph out there?
Overcast is always great for photography because you get an even distribution of light. What makes Biosphere such a perfect place, such a great place to photograph, is that it's 5 different biomes underneath a big glass dome, quote unquote, right? So all the light is already filtered and so it's evenly distributed, and you have the desert biome, the rainforest biome, the ocean, where everything is just so interesting. And it's one of those places that I think journalistically you can actually use the word unique, because there's really nowhere else on Earth, aside Earth itself, where you have all these different habitats that you can travel to and photograph. Biosphere puts that all in a 3.14 acre property where you can be in the desert one moment and then you'll be on the beach, oceanside. And the textures, the lighting that gets distributed in there, the shadows, is just spectacular. The rainforest is by far probably one of my favorite places for photographing inside the Biosphere, just because there is no other rainforest like it in the world.
And speaking of the researchers, you have a situation with many scientists at work at Biosphere 2, so it's an opportunity to get researchers in their environment or in their habitat.
You always want to try and capture a human element, so it's always a great opportunity when the researchers are out there working on the ocean, working in the rainforest, working even in the technosphere or the agrivoltaic project that's out there with Dr. Barron-Gafford. So it's really fun because it's something that takes them out of your stereotypical lab with the microscopes and the beakers and everything and the lab coats. You're out there in the field with these researchers working in the desert environment where, Dr. Joost van Haren, who is a visiting scholar from Atlanta, Georgia Tech, where he's working on a Precambrian experiment growing food in arid conditions. So he's got these really cool rock incubators that are set up in the desert biome that is just, it's on a platform, it's lit really well, and then when you have them in there, you get the, with rules of composition, you get the repeating patterns, you have lines, you have shadows. It's just such a great opportunity there. You have Katie Morgan now taking over the ocean, and the ocean, of course, you have so many textures in there, so many different colors. You can shoot from above or below, but then Katie's in the middle, and you get so many things, so many different opportunities, because it's an ocean in a bottle. So it's really cool where you can take that opportunity to teach students and work with them on getting the close-up shots of the hermit crab or the coral that's out there, or even just the ocean itself looking up into the space frame, which is just a spectacular view that you really don't get to see very often.
John Dios, thank you very much, telling the story of Biosphere 2 in pictures. The biosphere concept of Earth system science research is creating environments where they aren't supposed to be. Scientists are using the concept to ask questions and find answers on a large scale. In the Sonoran Desert, the research mission continues. We close the show with another look at natural photography from Biosphere 2 and a reminder that we're creating a new public affairs show. It will launch in January. We'll be off for the Thanksgiving holiday next week, but Metro Week will be back in December. Thanks for watching.